I mean, we are conservative Republicans. I'm a conservative Republican. And so I want to conserve those things that make South Dakota great. And for me, that's faith and that's family and that's freedom. And that will always be my focus.
Welcome to a special episode of the Searchlight Report, a podcast from South Dakota Searchlight. I'm your host, Megan O'Brien. I sat down for an interview with each of the Republicans seeking their party's nomination for governor in the June 2nd primary election. I asked each of them the same set of questions. In this series of episodes, you'll hear more from each candidate about their goals for state policy on abortion, data centers, and economic development, among other topics. I also asked each candidate to share their big idea for South Dakota. You just heard from current State Speaker of the House Jon Hansen, a lawyer from Dell Rapids. He's served 11 total years in the State House of Representatives. Hansen is also the co-founder of the anti-abortion Life Defense Fund. This past legislative session, there was quite a focus on abortion legislation, including new legislation to restrict abortion pills coming into the state, and defining further what an abortion procedure is. As governor, do you see the need for further regulations and legislation regarding abortion in the state, and what would that look like?
Well, just by way of background, the life issue is one of the reasons I really got involved in the crazy political arena in the first place. I was just really convicted that, I wanted to help protect unborn babies and their moms and their dads in these crisis pregnancy situations. And just was really saddened by the loss of innocent life through abortion. And so that was really something that convicted me and inspired me to get involved in the first place. And so some of my first things I ever did in terms of volunteering or doing anything like that in the political realm was back on the statewide abortion campaigns back in 2006 and 2008, where there were a large group of pro-lifers that were trying to make South Dakota more pro-life. Both of those efforts failed back then. And ever since then, in my time in the legislature and beyond, I've just been a real solid advocate for unborn life and for moms and dads in the state. And just recently, there was an abortion amendment that was attempted to be written into our state constitution that would have legalized abortion all the way up to the point of birth. That was called Constitutional Abortion Amendment G. It was on the ballot last November, or I should say the last November election. And when I saw that that was coming down the pike, I formed an organization called the Life Defense Fund and took the reins and led the way to keep South Dakota pro-life. And so in spite of a lot of people who said we could never defeat that constitutional abortion amendment, in spite of the polls saying that we were going to lose every single time, we did defeat Constitutional Abortion Amendment G by 59 to 41%, and we kept South Dakota pro-life through my leadership in fighting that constitutional abortion amendment. And so that's my track record on the life issue. I'm always going to be a strong defender of unborn life and doing everything that we can do to look out for moms and dads in those sometimes crisis pregnancy situations. So this last legislative session, there were a couple bills that came through that I was supportive of. And you mentioned those, one of which was dealing with these chemical abortion pills. And, now South Dakota, of course, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, we prohibit abortions in South Dakota. And yet we've seen a real flood of chemical abortion pills come into South Dakota. Obviously, that's deadly to the unborn baby, but it's also been very risky to mothers. And I've actually seen cases where mothers in South Dakota ordered these chemical abortion pills online, and they came from somewhere overseas. They shipped them to South Dakota. The mother got them and said, "Boy, something just doesn't seem right about this." So she brought them in for help. And I was talking to a doctor after all of this went down, and I asked the doctor, what would have happened if she would have taken those pills as she was prescribed? And the doctor said, well, she might have bled out and died. And we cannot have an unregulated market of illegal chemical abortion pills coming into South Dakota. It's really dangerous. And so this session we passed a law to allow our state's attorneys and our attorney general just some more authority to go after those individuals who are sending those pills or trafficking in those chemical abortion pills into South Dakota. So I think that was a good thing that we did. And going forward, it's really difficult to know what exactly is going to be needed in terms of additional statutes. I would have never thought after Roe versus Wade was overturned that we'd have so many chemical abortions coming into the state, at least not in these numbers. And so, we just always have to remain vigilant. We always have to keep focused on protecting life, on looking out for moms and dads. And so whether that requires a statute or whether that just requires being there with mothers and fathers in those situations as friends and neighbors and family members, we're going to keep focusing on keeping South Dakota pro-life and really building a culture of life and family in this state.
Okay. But for now, what you see, abortion is already illegal in the state, except to preserve the life of the mother. Do you see kind of right now any other kind of avenues that you would want to kind of introduce statute or introduce further restrictions on abortion access?
No, I mean, I think we've got some of the strongest laws in the country right now as it relates to our pro-life laws, and so I'm pretty comfortable with where things are at. And again, sometimes it's not it's not additional laws that are needed. It's just being there for your friends and your family and your neighbors when they are in those situations, and that's on us as citizens of the state of South Dakota. So I really don't see a need. I mean, I don't have anything in mind, particularly for any law. I don't have anything that I'm particularly aiming for on this issue because I do think that our laws are really strong. And we you never quite know what could come up in the future, but as of right now, we've got, I think, the strongest pro-life laws in the country, and we're just going to make sure that we stay that way.
And so then obviously too, property tax reduction was a pretty big topic in the legislature this year, with a lot of focus on reducing property taxes for all homeowners in the state. But there were also a lot of legislative conversations around expanding existing relief programs for people who are veterans, people who are part of the elderly or disabled populations. Would you want to increase the amount of South Dakotans who are using those programs? And what would that promotion for those programs look like if you do want to increase that usage?
Yeah, I would. This last summer, we did a property tax task force, which I sponsored and created through the legislature. And we went around the state to all different corners of South Dakota, and really for two reasons: to develop concepts of legislation to bring to session, but then also um, to hear from people all across South Dakota and how high property taxes are affecting them. And we heard in a particularly striking way from grandparents on fixed incomes. And I remember very vividly a lady, her name was Kay from Piedmont, an 82-year-old grandma, and she came to testify before our committee. And she was there with her grandson. She had a tank of oxygen that she was wheeling next to her. And she came up to the table to start testifying, and she said, I need help. I am on a fixed income, and I can't afford my property taxes. And even with the existing program that we have for seniors on a fixed income, I can't afford my property taxes. And then when I go into town and I work so that I can afford more, I no longer qualify for the programs. And so Kay and others were in this situation where literally because of high property taxes, they're being forced out of their homes, or an 82-year-old grandmother is being forced to go into town to take a job because she can't afford her property taxes. And I just think that's totally wrong, particularly because it's an issue that we can help solve at the state level and at the local level. And so I took it upon myself to do that. Um, this interim, we did pass out of the task force expansions for programs for seniors on a fixed income and also for disabled vets. Unfortunately, those bills died over in the Senate, never made it over to the House of Representatives, where I'm the speaker. But I did support those coming out of the task force, and I'm going to continue to fight for those things. As I've talked to more seniors on fixed incomes, and of course, I was just about 3 weeks ago with a group of veterans, and this issue came up, and it's really important to them. And so I'm going to continue to fight for that going forward. I'm not done on that issue um, with those particular programs. You know, we did pass a property tax relief measure that next year, when this kicks in, it takes a little while for property tax relief to kick in, just the way we pay property taxes. But when this kicks in, homeowners are going to see anywhere from a 22 to 15% savings, 15 to 22% savings in their owner-occupied property tax bill. And so that will be a relief for those individuals. But I do think we need to do more to target help and support our grandparents on fixed incomes and our disabled veterans. It's something I've supported in the past, and I'm going to continue to fight for them going forward.
The South Dakota State Department of Social Services estimates that more than 1,000 Medicaid enrollees in the state could lose coverage once the federal work requirements kick in next year. What will you as governor do about that?
Well, I do support work requirements for the Medicaid expansion program because it's important that we encourage those who are taking part of those systems to actually go out and work. And I think work is a good thing, and it brings dignity and purpose to individuals. And so I don't hesitate for a second in my support of work requirements for those programs. It's not for the entire population. I think we're just talking about Medicaid expansion here, which is a population of able-bodied working adults, and not all the other people who are taking usage of our Medicaid program. So I've been a supporter of work requirements for that program, and I'm going to continue to be a supporter of that as well.
What do you think that the state's role in economic development should be? And if elected, how would you establish or continue that role?
Well, that's been a real source of division amongst Republicans lately out in Pierre. And I will say there are some, including some of my opponents, who really believe that in order to have economic development in South Dakota, that you have to tax all of the small businesses and all the entrepreneurs in the state and redistribute it to massive, sometimes out of state, sometimes foreign companies. And I have disagreed with that approach on many different levels. I mean, we've seen not only deals that go terribly bad, that cost the taxpayers millions of dollars in wasted spending, but it's also a breeding ground of corruption. And I don't want a South Dakota where we have DC style deals getting made between politicians and businesses where the politicians give away tax money and then expect political contributions in return. Or like we saw with the CJ Schwann's um, uh, deal with the state that I know your paper, your outlet reported on quite extensively, where an individual who was giving away the money from the state then ended up getting a major executive branch or executive position within that company. So I don't think the state of South Dakota should be having bureaucrats give away money and then get executive positions within companies. That's the kind of misdealing that I think that has come with some of these programs. And so we reject that. What I believe in is supporting South Dakota small businesses and entrepreneurs, our Main Street businesses that make up all of our communities and are a part of what makes South Dakota special. And I think they should just be treated fairly, just like everybody else. I want a low tax, low regulation environment for those businesses so that they can do what they do best, which is create great products and services and create great jobs for their communities. I don't want to be taxing them in order to take their money and redistribute it to South Korean companies or Minnesota companies, where those businesses that were taxed, our South Dakota small businesses, will never really see any benefit from that whatsoever. So my focus is on small businesses, on medium-sized businesses right here in South Dakota through a low tax, low regulation, free market environment. And that will always be my focus in addition to our farming and ranching communities. We are not going to just sit by and let all of their money be redistributed by bureaucrats in Pierre to massive out-of-state foreign-backed companies. I just think that's wrong. That approach needs to be ended in South Dakota, and I'm going to end those programs in favor of support for South Dakota small businesses and entrepreneurs.
A lot of recently enacted laws in South Dakota could make it harder to vote, including new requirements for proof of citizenship when registering and a new way to challenge a person's ability to vote. What policies would you pursue when it comes to voting access?
Well, we've taken many steps towards making sure we have secure elections in South Dakota. That's been my focus, and that's what I'm going to continue to focus on. I saw a story recently on that topic, but here's the reality. I mean, there were people who weren't from South Dakota and who never lived in South Dakota who were voting in South Dakota elections. I remember very vividly, we were doing a committee hearing once on one of these bills, and an individual testified from Germany. And he had been an Iowa resident. He took a federal contracting job, and he ended up living in Germany. And he said, "You guys, you can't pass this bill that you're attempting to pass, because if you do, I won't be able to vote in South Dakota." And so I asked him in the question and answer segment, "Have you ever actually lived in South Dakota?" And he said, "No." This guy had never lived in South Dakota, and yet he was wanting to vote in South Dakota elections. There were numerous people like that, a lot of people like that. And I think that's wrong. I think we should all be able to agree that that's wrong, that only South Dakotans should be voting in our South Dakota elections. And so we fought on that issue, and we ended up passing some really important protections to make sure that our South Dakota elections are by South Dakotans and for South Dakotans. And so that's what we did. I'm going to continue to make sure that we have secure and fair elections in South Dakota. That's been an important aspect of my work as a legislator, and something that I'm going to continue to focus on in the future. If we don't have secure elections, we got real problems. We need to make sure that the citizens of South Dakota and America have confidence in our election system, because if that's eroded, we're going to have some big problems going forward. So secure elections are very important. I'm going to continue to fight for those.
Regulations for data centers were also pretty talked about during the session. A lot of regulations were on the table for lawmakers this year. How do you, as governor, plan to regulate them, if at all?
Well, we actually passed a bill this session that I led on, called the Data Center Bill of Rights for Citizens. And so, one of the differences really in this race between me and my opponents is that we don't just talk the talk on these issues. We actually go out and we fight and we lead and we deliver for conservative Republican values. And on this issue, there's a broad coalition of support for the measure that we passed, called the Data Center Bill of Rights for Citizens. And so that Data Center Bill of Rights for Citizens really ended up doing three things. Number one, it addresses the concerns of skyrocketing electricity bills, because as we've seen across the country, in some places where there are data centers that are being constructed, electricity bills are going up north of 240%. I mean, it's crazy the amount of money that electricity bills are going up due to the construction of hyperscale data centers. We didn't want that in South Dakota. We want to look out for affordability. Electricity bills are already getting too high. It's already really hard to pay your electric bill. We don't want them going up anymore because you have to subsidize the electricity for a big tech data center. And so one of the very important provisions that we put into that bill, it's now the law of South Dakota, says that they have to pay, that is a data center, has to pay for all the costs associated with the provision of electricity, and that your electricity bills cannot go up 1 cent due to the construction of hyperscale data centers. That was very important, and it's going to protect a lot of people's money in South Dakota from being lost due to the construction of hyperscale data centers. The other thing that it did is it looks out for local water resources, because hyperscale data centers can take a massive amount of water to cool them. And there's a lot of concerns around the country and here in South Dakota about protecting our water resources. And so we put a protection in there to say that a data center would need to go to the local water provider and make sure that there's enough water resources for the people who are already living there first. And if that's not the case, if they can't serve that data center because of the amount of water usage, then that data center can't be constructed in that community. And then finally, it looked out for local control so that local citizens in towns and counties, that they have the final say, and that the state cannot come in and override their decisions that they're making at the local level. Those are really important protections for South Dakotans. And again, something that we led on, while others in this race, they just weren't there on that fight. But we were looking out for the people of South Dakota. And then finally, the last thing that we did this legislative session was when there were bills to give big, massive tax breaks to these data centers. We opposed those bills and we killed those bills in the House of Representatives. There were also bills in the Senate that got killed over there. I just don't think that Mark Zuckerberg needs tax breaks from the citizens of South Dakota. These are some of the world's richest tech companies, and if they want to come into South Dakota, they're welcome to do so. But we should just treat them fairly, just like every other small business in South Dakota that's paying their fair share of the taxes. Uh, there's no reason that massive tech companies shouldn't also have to pay their fair share. So when those bills came in, we killed those bills. And so at the end of the day, if they want to come into South Dakota, they're going to be treated just like anybody else, any other South Dakota small business. And in addition to that, we're going to look out for the people of South Dakota first to make sure that your water resources are protected, that your electricity bills aren't going up, and that locals have the final say.
Do you see then future conversations around further restrictions or kind of adapting those restrictions to how data centers are coming into the state?
Well, you never know in terms of protections that South Dakotans might need. I mean, we'll see what develops. Yeah, this industry is ever changing, and I remember, I think we all do, the photos of the first computers that took up the size of pretty big rooms, and now you have more powerful computers in your pocket with your cell phone. And so I anticipate that this hyperscale AI industry is going to be rapidly changing as well. We just don't know what that's going to look like in the future. I know that SpaceX is in talks to put hyperscale data centers in outer space and put them up there. So we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. And so it would be premature to talk about any, I think, future legislation at this point. But I will say, when it comes to looking out for the people of this state, we've been in the driver's seat on that. We've been leading on that, and we're going to continue to make sure that we're putting South Dakotans first again, and not massive, big money out of state lobbyists. And it's been a real focus of mine. It's going to continue to be a focus of mine as governor.
The western part of the state saw significantly less snow this year, and multiple wildfires burned through thousands of acres in western counties. How do you, as governor, see approaching positive changes when it comes to environmental change and climate change, environmental disaster? How do you see making those changes?
Well, first of all, I'm not a I don't subscribe to the notion of man-made climate change, and so I'm not concerned about carbon in the atmosphere. That came up in a big way over on the east side of the state when we dealt with the carbon sequestration pipeline that was part of the Green New Deal scam. And they wanted to come in and take people's land using condemnation proceedings, eminent domain, and lay a carbon sequestration pipeline across the ground. And if it burst, it would create such a plume of carbon, it displaces all the oxygen, and it literally could kill anybody around that area where the pipeline burst. And they were going to put that right up against people's property, close to people's houses. And so we fought back against that in a big way, and we ended up passing a law to make sure that private property rights are protected in South Dakota. We ended eminent domain abuse by Green New Deal scam carbon pipeline companies. Carbon is plant food, and so I don't think it's necessary to be sequestering it up in North Dakota, for example. But on the west side of the state, we do need to make sure that we're looking out for our beautiful Black Hills. And so, we should be working along with the federal government on forest management to make sure that we're employing the best practices out in the Black Hills to help prevent wildfires or help prevent the spread of wildfires. I think that's really important. Every time that I go out west, I'm just struck by the beauty of the Black Hills. I absolutely love it. And it's such a gift from God and a treasure to the people of this state. And so we do need to be making sure that we're engaging in really good forest management practices. And not only at the state level, but that we're also making sure the federal government is doing the same thing. And depending on who's in the administration, boy, we've had some real problems with that in the past. But I will always be a strong advocate for looking out for the beautiful creation that God has blessed us with in the state, and in a particular way out west with our Black Hills. I think it's absolutely just incredible what we've got. And we need to make sure that we're good stewards of that and we keep it that way. And so whether it's out there, whether it's on the east side of the state, where, I live in Del Rapids. And so we've got the Big Sioux River flowing through Del Rapids. And it's not in the best of shape. I mean, it's not looking very good. And so we've supported bills in the past to do voluntary buffer strips along the river. If landowners choose to engage in that sort of practice, the state is ready to partner with them to try to clean up our rivers, to try to clean up our streams. And so we're looking out for our natural beauty in South Dakota. I think it's important. And I think, we have an obligation as citizens of the state to leave South Dakota in an even better place than how it was given to us. And I want to answer that call to do just that. And so we're gonna focus on all sorts of policies from east side to west side. But at the end of the day, we want to leave South Dakota even more beautiful than we were blessed to receive it.
Where do you think that the state's relationship stands with tribal nations in the state, and how would you plan to continue or develop that relationship as governor?
Well, it's been hurting over the last number of years, I would say, and where there were a lot of tensions between the governor's office and our tribal nations here in South Dakota. And I hate to see that. And we really need to get back to a point where we just come into these conversations with open hearts and do what we can do to partner together for a better life, both on the reservations and off the reservations. And that's something that I look forward to doing. I don't think that our partners on the tribal lands really want me to come in and just try to dictate what they should be doing. I know that's not what they want, but I do want to go just with an open heart and say, okay, well, here are the problems that we can identify, from um, really major crime issues to education issues to some brokenness in the family institution. And what can we do? How can we partner together to bring about some healing, to bring about some security, and to bring about better education? And there's some things happening right now that I think show real strong opportunity. There's some education opportunities that are taking place on some of the reservations that bring me a lot of hope for the future. And so we're just going to continue to pursue those, but not in the way where I'm ever going to go in and just try to tell um, our tribal communities what they should be doing. I don't think that's the right approach. I think we have to come at this from a place of collaboration, a place of openness, and a place where we all recognize the problems and that we just come together to try to build solutions.
About half of the existing inmates in the state end up returning to prison within 3 years of their release. How will you, as governor, work to redirect those inmates?
Well, we've had some major problems when it comes to recidivism in South Dakota, and a lot of that is rooted in some of our DOC policies and how they've conducted their affairs over in the Department of Corrections, which of course falls under the governor's office. And we need some real reforms. I've talked to a lot of prisoners who were in prison and then got out of prison and didn't reoffend. And so I think they're the perfect people to listen to when you try to think about, okay, how do you not reoffend? How do we get recidivism down in South Dakota? And I can just share, I mean, you can wrap these up in any kind of program or whatever that you want, but there's really three key ingredients in all of those conversations that I've had to making sure people stay out of prison once they've been in there. And the three key ingredients are faith, family, and purpose beyond themselves. And I truly believe if you go and foster those three things, you're going to see our recidivism rate rapidly decline in South Dakota. And unfortunately, under the DOC leadership, those three things were really pulled back. The three key ingredients that we need were pulled back. Prison ministry opportunities were pulled back. Prison ministers who used to be able to go into the prison and minister to inmates weren't allowed to go in anymore. Um, uh, Services were delayed. Family visits were limited, and vocational opportunities like welding programs that were in behind bars, they were completely eliminated too. And I think that's a failure of leadership at the DOC under the governor's office. We really need to make sure that we restore and foster those programs. And so that's what I'm going to continue to do. And then in addition to that, we need to look at the Board of Pardons and Parole, because at the end of the day, if somebody presents a risk that when they get out of prison, they're going to reoffend, they should not be let out into our society. Our number one goal needs to be protecting the citizens of South Dakota. And it's a massive injustice if somebody is let out on parole and they go reoffend and they harm you or your neighbor or your friend or your family member. I do not want that for South Dakota, and I will not let that happen. And so we're going to get tougher to make sure that if you're not ready to be out of prison, you're not getting let out of prison. And then if you are on parole, because we've determined that you're a low risk of reoffending, the DOC needs better supervision of our parolees. And so we're going to focus on that as well and get them the resources that they need to make sure that these individuals are properly supervised who are out on parole. So it runs the gamut from programs that we need to do in the bars to what we need to do when people are on parole. Um, we've got the right answers for this. We just need the right leadership to implement those programs, and that's what I'm going to do as governor.
And then when you look back at past governors, some have had very defining impacts on South Dakota. Kind of among other accomplishments, Peter Norbeck founded Custer State Park. George Mickelson had his year of reconciliation to strengthen that relationship between Native Americans and the state. And Bill Janklow used prison inmates to wire the state's K through 12 and university buildings for internet access. What's your big specific idea for the future of South Dakota?
Well, I think South Dakota needs a governor who is going to put the people and families first again and foster goodness and what makes South Dakota really special. I mean, we are conservative Republicans. I'm a conservative Republican. And so I want to conserve those things that make South Dakota great. And for me, that's faith and that's family and that's freedom. And that will always be my focus. Um, I want to make sure that South Dakota stays a great place to raise a family, the best place in the country to raise a family, where it's safe, where we have great education for our kids. Because at the end of the day, I mean, my focus is that what I think is most important to all of us in our lives. Obviously, career jobs are very important. We're gonna foster a strong economy through the free market, through low taxes and low regulation. But we also can't lose sight of the fact that even beyond that, what's more meaningful is our relationships with our neighbors and our friends and our family. And so I want to foster strong, loving, warm communities in the South Dakota where families are safe, where they're getting a great education, and where at the end of the day, there's opportunities for our kids to stay in South Dakota and build a family of their own. That's what I want for South Dakota, and so that's what I'm going to continue to focus on. We're going to focus on the three things that we strongly are passionate about: faith and family and freedom. And if we do that in South Dakota, more than any other program that we can do, if we foster those three things, South Dakota is going to be such a great place and an even better place than it is today. And so that's really what I want to bring, that kind of leadership to the governor's office.
Okay. As a final question, is there anything else that you want the voters of South Dakota to know?
Nope, I think that's great.
Hansen is one of 4 Republican candidates running for governor. The Republican primary election is June 2nd, and early voting is underway. The winner of the Republican primary will advance to the November general election to face Democratic candidate Dan Allers. That's all we have for this episode of Searchlight Report. Audio for this episode of the podcast came from recordings by South Dakota Searchlight. The podcast is based on reporting by South Dakota Searchlight's staff, editor Seth Tupper, senior reporter John Holt, and reporters Joshua Heyer, Mackenzie Huber, and me. I write the scripts and produce the audio with editing by Seth Tupper. South Dakota Searchlight is part of States Newsroom, the nation's largest nonprofit news organization. Until next time, I'm South Dakota Searchlight's Megan O'Brien with the Searchlight Report.